Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Leah Mix, founder and CEO of Delphi, and I'm so glad you've joined us for a series of strategic insight sessions that we're offering this year. We're dedicating this first session to Amanda Fielding, an elder who recently left this earth, but whose resonance is carried in all who knew and loved her. Amanda's life's work will continue to infuse millions of lives with goodness and grace, just as she did in life. Truly, our work at Delphi would not be possible without the courageous work of many others who have come before us. Thank you, Amanda, for all of your blessings. You will be dearly missed. Today's session is an introduction to Delphi and our view of what it will actually take behind the scenes for psychedelic therapies to move from promise to practice in our healthcare system, and Delphi's unique role in this. A little about my background. As a licensed behavioral health clinician, I spent 12 years providing direct service in community mental health. I then worked in the commercial health insurance industry for over a decade, bringing new behavioral health treatments into the healthcare system and getting them adopted into coverage at scale. In 2016, I began working in the field of psychedelics, helping to build the infrastructure needed for psychedelic therapies to come into the healthcare system. Two of these projects were the Board of Psychedelic Medicines and Therapies, a certification board, and Inthea, which is a health plan administrator or insurance company light that allows employers to cover psychedelic therapies for their employees. My message to the field of psychedelic medicine has been consistent from the start. The field must become coherent and trustworthy to the incumbent systems if psychedelic therapies are to reach all who can benefit from them safely and affordably. Many of you are already tracking the momentum around FDA approvals. And while last year's seeming setback with MDMA was disappointing, it's also given the industry a chance to recalibrate and lay stronger foundations for a more thoughtful rollout of these therapies. Of course, approval alone doesn't equal access. And at Delphi, we focus on the work that often goes unseen, such as recalibration of infrastructure within insurance, government, and healthcare delivery. We think of our role as creating connective tissue that is needed to increase the coherence between the incumbent systems and the field of psychedelics to ensure that these therapies are not only available, but also equitable, effective, and scalable. To that end, we're decidedly focused on generating information the decision makers need to ensure that these treatments can move through approval to insurance and healthcare system adoption and ultimately have global reach. The truth is, if we want psychedelics to move forward in ways that are mutually beneficial, win-wins for all stakeholders, we will need many people, especially those with influence over resources and policy, many people who have no specific interest in psychedelics to make good decisions about them. So today, I'm excited to highlight some of our current and future projects that aim to potentiate these positive outcomes and the individuals and organizations that make our work possible. This will be a short but focused conversation, about 25 minutes, and we'll save time at the end for questions. So let's dive in. First, I want to take a moment to share a bit about Delphi, where we come from, what work we're doing, and why. Much like the ancient holy site in Greece, where the Oracle of Delphi offered divine insight to humanity, Delphi Consultancy was founded on the recognition that psychedelic therapies can't succeed without the material infrastructure to support them. They have the potential to transform lives, but only if the systems around them are ready to receive them. Our vision is a future where psychedelic therapies are integrated into the broader healthcare system in ways that are safe, equitable, and effective. Our mission is to bridge the gap between this emerging field and the complex realities of insurance, policy, economics, and care delivery. We do that by developing data education and relationships that make systemic change possible. True to this mission, Delphi's first client 3 years ago was the US government, and I am proud to say we have grown organically since then without marketing or fanfare. We're not here to advocate for psychedelic therapies as a concept. We're here to help make their safe and meaningful adoption a reality, stone by stone, brick by brick, until the infrastructure supports the true potential of these ancient technologies for the benefit of humanity, and the need for access to them is self-evident. At Delphi, we're guided by Buckminster Fuller's assertion that existing systems can evolve through willing adoption of beneficial upgrades without the friction of forced change. Therefore, our approach is very intentional. First, we hold a non-advocacy position. We're not here to push a particular compound or modality. Instead, we're focused on practical implementation, helping decision makers understand what's real, what's possible, and what needs to happen next. We don't offer readings from a crystal ball. We offer facts and expert analysis that is tailored to leadership's needs, which is why our work is decidedly decision maker focused. That includes payers, policymakers, regulators, and system leaders, the people responsible for determining what gets covered, regulated, adopted, and scaled. We are deeply grounded in expertise across healthcare innovation, policy, reimbursement, systems design, economics, and more. We've built a team that understands the psychedelic field and the incumbent systems with which it needs to integrate. And finally, we act as a bridge between systems. We translate across sectors, from emerging psychedelic models to legacy healthcare, from grassroots energy to government structures. Our job is to make those connections functional and generative. Our Hope, Heal, and Landscape projects are some of Delphi's key efforts that highlight the kind of bridge work that we're doing. First, the Hope Project, Health Outcomes and Psychedelic Economics. Hope is an economic analysis project designed to speak directly to the people who hold the purse strings, from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to commercial health insurance payers to legislators and the Government Office of Management and Budget. Our goal is to quantify just how much the U.S. healthcare system stands to gain financially if psychedelic therapies are FDA approved and covered by insurance. The project brings together the leading health economists through the Collaborative for the Economics of Psychedelics at UC Berkeley, led by Dr. Elliot Marsai, and the leading healthcare claims economics experts at MSide Solutions, led by Dr. Silver Quevedo, to evaluate a collection of the most promising psychedelic therapies and model their potential economic impact, helping to answer not just whether these treatments are effective, but whether they're worth investing in at scale. As part of this work, we'll also be contributing a comprehensive review of the efficacy data to the public domain, a resource that is much needed in a field moving this fast and still seeking FDA approval. The work of Hope began after conversations with Representative Lou Correa and Representative Jack Bergman's offices, who are leading the Congressional Psychedelics Advancing Therapies, or PATH caucus. The representative staff agreed that this type of financial modeling is essential to bring other legislators to the table and move legislation forward, which, for example, could provide funding for psychedelic research. When we presented this proposal at the Psychedelic Medicines Coalition Summit in DC in May, the response was remarkable. Federal agency staff, legislative leaders, and industry stakeholders alike recognized it as one of the most important and timely projects for the field. One senior lobbyist actually stood up and said to Dr. Marsai, who was presenting the project, "Sir, you are doing God's work," which Dr. Marsai thought was a very unique comment about economics research, but also very meaningful, considering this lobbyist's decades of experience on Capitol Hill. So the bottom line is that Hope is designed to deliver the kind of data that gets decisions made. Even people with no personal stake in psychedelics or even active skepticism can't ignore the numbers when the value proposition is clear. This is the type of information that, when rigorously developed, can fundamentally shift the financial outlook for the industry, and with it, the potential for achieving safe access to these therapies at scale. Next, I'd like to highlight HEAL, Health Economics and Access for Ibogaine. HEAL brings a similar economic lens to a very specific and timely opportunity: the potential for multiple state governments to lead on the development of Ibogaine therapies, beginning with public investment in Ibogaine research, such as we are now witnessing in Texas. Thank you, Brian Hubbard, and everyone involved there. The HEAL proposal takes the broader national economic case and brings it down to the state level. This research is designed to demonstrate how much states can save by moving forward with funding research and how those savings could grow as treatment infrastructure scales. Additionally, HEAL helps to ensure good decision-making by including a non-advocacy education component specifically designed for state-level decision-makers, including legislators and agency leaders. This will help untangle decades of misinformation and provide clear, science-based foundation for policy decisions around Ibogaine. The goal is not to persuade, but to inform, so that states can make thoughtful, evidence-based choices in line with their own public health goals. By combining rigorous, evidence-backed economic modeling with clear, non-advocacy education, HEAL creates the strongest possible foundation for psychedelic therapies to be understood and evaluated based on the merits of data, science, and real-world impact. And finally, our landscape map. This is our effort to describe the psychedelic ecosystem in a way that makes it more visible, more navigable, and more connected. One of the biggest challenges we hear, especially from decision makers outside of the field, is that the psychedelic industry is too hard to understand. It's just too messy. It's been compared more than once to the old parable of the three blind men trying to describe an elephant, each person grabbing onto a different part of the animal and assuming it's the whole. Lots of confusion. The landscape map aims to change that. This project provides a structured, accessible view of the ecosystem, identifying its key components, how they function, who's involved, and how they relate to one another. The goal is twofold. First, to help people outside of the field, especially in government, healthcare, and finance, understand how this emerging sector is organized and where it fits into the broader systems that may soon be expected to adopt and support psychedelic therapies. And second, to help the ecosystem itself become more self-aware, to better understand its own structure, to identify areas of overlap and fragmentation, and to find opportunities for alignment and collaboration. Our landscape mapping is about creating a shared visibility so we can all move forward with greater clarity, connection, and coherence. And before we go on, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge Blossom and Floris Wolswijk, whose prior work made our landscape mapping possible. We are so blessed to have a robust and highly synergistic partnership with Blossom and Floris. Hope, HEAL, and the landscape map are some of Delphi's key projects that highlight the kind of bridge work we're doing at the intersection of psychedelics and the incumbent systems of government, healthcare, and finance. These projects focus on building the foundations of a healthy psychedelics industry to enable good decision-making around psychedelic therapies through non-advocacy education, economic insight, and ecosystem coherence. Now let's look at some of our future projects. In addition to our current projects, our future projects reflect where we see some of the most significant gaps and opportunities for healthy scaling of psychedelic therapies into the healthcare system. First, our European Reimbursement Action Plan. Recently, Blossom released a 200-page initial roadmap for reimbursement of psychedelic therapies in Europe. Now we are leveraging that work under Delphi to build a comprehensive action plan for stakeholders in multiple countries, helping to ensure these therapies can be adopted into the care delivery system covered by payers and made broadly accessible under national reimbursement systems. Now, interestingly, as we have compared the US and Europe, we have also noticed striking parallels in what is needed to achieve access. We believe this may open opportunities for beneficial international collaborations. Next, our patient registry framework. One of the most significant opportunities in the field is the development of well-designed and accessible patient registries. This is a foundational gap and a priority for emerging therapies seeking real-world evidence to support quality care, safety, and outcomes. So we're developing a proposal for a registry framework that can support the field with common data standards, flexible implementation models, and collaborative research infrastructure, helping psychedelic therapies to move forward towards clinical excellence at scale. And finally, care delivery design and value-based payment models. The behavioral healthcare system lags behind the medical care delivery system in payment innovation by more than a decade, especially in the use of value-based care contract arrangements. These payment arrangements financially incentivize care providers to actually improve patient health. People get better, you make more money. That's the deal. However, behavioral health has largely lagged behind because mental illness has long lacked any effective treatments. With psychedelic therapies, there's an opportunity to change this and finally align behavioral healthcare providers' financial incentives with patient well-being, not just symptom management. So we're exploring partnerships with healthcare systems and innovators to model new care delivery frameworks for psychedelic-assisted therapy built around improved outcomes and value-based payment arrangements, which will lead to sustainable clinical pathways. This sample of Delphi's projects provide a look under the hood as to the work we believe is essential and for which we are well equipped to contribute to the healthy growth of the psychedelic industry and its relationship to the incumbent systems and institutions from which the field needs support. Now, while we're proud of what we are doing, we are not the only ones doing meaningful healthcare and policy bridge work in the field. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge 3 organizations that are also working to engage the incumbent healthcare systems and provide some of the critical infrastructure needed for these emerging therapies. Those are Brain Futures, the Psychedelic Medicine Association, and the Board of Psychedelic Medicines and Therapies. Each of these organizations is working to advance key policy and system adoption efforts from clinical practice guidelines and standards of care to accreditation and certification for practitioner training and CPT code development. These are some foundational pieces needed for any new area of medicine. We are grateful to be in conversation and collaboration with each of these organizations as we all contribute to this shared mission in different ways. So we thank all of these nonprofits for the work that they are doing. In addition to links to our project materials, we'll also provide a link to a presentation that explains the U.S. healthcare payer system and why these organizations' work is so important on our website. What started with just Floris and me 3 years ago has blossomed into an extraordinary team that makes amazing things happen. It has been one of the great privileges of my career to work with the Delphi team. Each person here is deeply experienced, highly committed, and profoundly values-driven. Not only are they uniquely qualified to do the work we do, but they also embody the emotional intelligence that is the secret sauce of high-performing teams. And this kind of team culture fosters creativity, strengthens collaboration, and elevates the quality of our work. We support each other, we laugh, we sometimes cry, we have fun, and we succeed and achieve again and again. I am deeply grateful to work alongside each of these incredible human beings on this journey. Behind the Delphi core team is an extraordinary and growing Braintrust of expert advisors. These individuals represent a wide range of disciplines such as healthcare, insurance, economics, law enforcement, public policy, pharma, research, finance, philanthropy, communications, clinical practice, and more. Together, they bring decades of experience across both the public and private sectors, helping to ensure our work is grounded, strategic, and relevant to the systems we aim to engage. This expert network is one of Delphi's greatest assets, not only because of their individual credibility, but because of the diversity of perspectives that they bring. It allows us to pressure test ideas, refine our strategies, and stay attuned to the evolving landscape across multiple domains. We're proud and deeply grateful to be guided by this community of thought leaders and change makers. At Delphi, we believe collaboration is the key to lasting systemic change. We're honored to work with a growing group of partners across the public and private and nonprofit sectors, organizations that not only share our values, but are essential to our work and to the shared mission of building a healthy, accessible psychedelic ecosystem. To everyone who's walked this path with us so far, Thank you. We're proud to stand alongside you, and we look forward to what we'll build together next. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this session offered meaningful insights and an introduction to Delphi, the work we do, why we do it, how we do it, and why we are confident in playing the role we do in bridging psychedelic therapies into the systems that shape policy, funding, and access to care. You've heard about our mission, some of our current and future projects, and the extraordinary team and advisors and partners who make this work possible. At the heart of it is our commitment to building the infrastructure that will allow this field to flourish with integrity and ultimately lead to a system upgrade that is willingly adopted by the existing systems in service to the betterment of all. This is the first in a series of insight sessions we'll be offering. We'd love to have you join us again. If there's a topic that you would like us to explore, or if you'd like to connect more directly about our work, we absolutely welcome that. So with deep appreciation for your time and interest, I thank you. And we will open the chat for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It's great to hear about all the work that we're doing and to hear about how diverse it is and all the different parts that have to come together. I'll be reading out the questions that people have. And I was going to say I have a few prepared if there's no questions, but I already see there's the first question here. So the first question from Will is, what clients do you plan to serve with the psychedelic registry? Is it particularly focused on clinical populations and research? And is there an interest in incorporating state-regulated models?
So those are all of the excellent questions that are being explored in the framework. So this is, especially with our future work, people who have a vested interest in how these things are designed and how they're carried out, we would actually invite you to be in touch with us because we would like to optimize with community and stakeholder input in how the framework is designed and who it serves. I'm sorry if that sounds like a bit of a non-answer, but I do hope that you hear that as invitation because we're at the very beginning of the process. So I hope you'll please be in touch, and anyone on the call who has an investment in those registries to be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah. And the question I had is that we're doing work that's both at the federal and at the state level. So with the PATH caucus and with the HEAL proposal in Texas, and of course the Ibogaine bill that's hopefully will be signed very soon. How do you see the interplay between the state and the federal approaches? Do you think states can move first, or might there be a risk that if it becomes a patchwork of all different states and there's nothing on the federal level? How do you see that interplay?
I think this is it's a really good question, Floris. And I think this is one of the most important opportunities that psychedelics have to create access, as many pathways for access as possible by coordinating what's happening at the state level with what's happening at the federal level. So yes, can things get messy and patchworky? Look at what we already have in the US healthcare system, right? So absolutely, and it would already be on that trajectory. But what we want to do is slow down and be very intentional. And that is part of the work that we do, is to look across what's happening at the federal level, what's happening at the state level, where are the opportunities for those things to be synergistic and to intersect, and where could there be tensions or things could possibly collide and make them difficult. That is an area that we really think needs to be explored more deeply. A visual that I've used as a kind of a map in my head is when we look at or think about access to psychedelics in general, there's medicalization, there's state level therapeutic use, and there's religious use. And if you think about it as a pie chart with wedges, each of these kind of has its own lane and its own domain. And we could create different pie charts with different types of wedges for maybe the federal and state level and so forth. But what's really interesting is, yes, the wedges themselves and getting access right in those particular domains, but the intersection where they touch, what's happening there. How can we go more deeply in there and make sure that these things are coordinated so that we can create the broadest access to these therapies as possible? So thank you so much for that question.
Thank you so much, Leah. You have a great question from Steve. Given that FDA approval of psychedelic therapies like MDMA or psilocybin hinges on safety and efficacy, while insurance coverage decisions are driven by cost effectiveness and clinical guidelines. So, how might we anticipate and address the potential disconnect between FDA approval and broad insurance reimbursement for these treatments?
That's a wonderful question. And I will say that the safety component is, just to dispel some myths, the safety component is actually very important also for insurance coverage. An insurance company will keep, even if it's FDA approved, can keep a new treatment on what's called experimental status indefinitely. And so that's one of the reasons why we are tackling this issue that you raise with both the assessment of the safety data. So if you were here for the part of the conversation about the HOPE proposal, you heard, okay, we're going to make the economic case that's going to help the payers to see and be motivated to cover these therapies and get prepared to do the outlay of cash that they need to do, right, to provide those health plans. We're also going to build in a review of the efficacy data and really provide that in the public domain. We saw there's an organization called ICEERS, which put out something similar previously to the previous FDA ruling. And this would be another crack at that with folks in the field who we think are probably most qualified to make that evaluation, and then have that information on efficacy and safety also be in the public domain. So I hope that answers some of your question. We will need to work very hard, even after FDA approval and before, to make sure that stamp of approval on safety does get translated to the decision makers in the insurance companies and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So it's not a done deal. There's a lot of work to do, and that's why we're laying the groundwork now. So thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Then I have a question from Kevin. When talking about decision makers at insurance companies, which expensive treatments paid for by insurance today do they view as most similar to psychedelic-assisted therapies that will be paid by insurance in the future? And I think you have some experience with this.
Yeah.
Um, is it viewed to be most like outpatient surgery, residential treatment for substance use disorders, or maybe something else?
Psychedelic therapies is broad, right? So that's a pretty big question. And one that what we advocate for is for the field itself to develop the standards that are then expressed to the insurance carriers. So it's not the insurance carriers who are necessarily making up those rules, right? That's actually a win-win scenario. So some of the treatments that I would look to and that we have looked to as comparators are things like applied behavior analysis, which includes, it's an outpatient therapy. It includes a technician also doing the work, or medicine-based therapies like with Suboxone or Subutex. A little bit overlap with TMS, although there is a device that's included there. But on the behavioral health side, honestly, the drug therapy combination is just unprecedented. And so we're going to have to work really diligently to make sure that this is coherent for the insurance carriers to see how the behavioral health care side can approve the therapy and the pharma side or division of the company can approve the medication, right? Those have to be coordinated. It's a bit of a trick. Now, the ideal scenario is that we have the lowest level of care that is also safe. So for MDMA or psilocybin therapy, that might be in a therapist's office. Perfectly, probably safe place for that to be done. Doesn't require a hospital stay. Now, for Ibogaine, that might be different, right? There's real medical concern there. And so that's probably going to need to be a facility that has more medical oversight and licensing. So it will depend on the type of treatment and also the type of practitioner that needs to be delivering and overseeing that care. So there's a lot of questions that the field still gets to answer and agree upon so that we can offer that information to the system so they can build the infrastructure and pay for it. So it's a wonderful, these questions are very intelligent and we so much appreciate them. And I want to take a step back to say, we very much, beyond this conversation, welcome you to be in touch with us, especially if you have ideas for projects or input on any of our existing work or future proposed work. We do hope to hear from you.
Thank you, Leah, for that extensive answer. And I think it leads into the next question from Talia. As Ibogaine becomes more discussed in medical and regulatory context, I'm concerned about how FDA approval, especially when tied to insurance reimbursement, might lead to a reduction in quality of care, particularly around the critical adjunct therapies that make Ibogaine effective. Given that Ibogaine isn't a plug-and-play pharmaceutical, but requires intensive preparation, integration, and aftercare, how do you see the FDA or insurance models accommodating that holistic framework?
What an awesome question. I would say that the nature of this question has largely been the greatest focus of my work in this field. And what it is very important to understand, number one, the FDA does not regulate therapy. And they're going to put out very kind of pithy standards of care, maybe some REMS related to the drug. Like every other area of medicine, it is up to the practitioners of that field to develop standards of care, to develop clinical practice guidelines that then articulate to the system, including the payers, what is the standard of care. And the way to go about that is by creating structures that the system recognizes. So dialing back, we mentioned the Psychedelic Medicine Association and BPMT. Brain Futures is also doing great work of this nature. When this infrastructure for the field exists, now we become more recognizable, more coherent, and more trustworthy, even to the FDA. It might have been a question that I sit with is if the field would have been able to show up to the FDA committee meeting and been able to say, hey, look, we know about the medical malpractice issues. We've got a certification board. We have a professional association. We will handle this. We will have our consumer protections in place, just like every other area of medicine. This is what we need to do. And this is the kind of maturing that we need to advance in the field. And Talia, to your question, when the field makes these decisions and takes that from the research into real world practice, and we can translate that into what are the services that are required, what are the CPT codes that need to go with that, then we can get into what is the actual reimbursement that is needed and who needs to be reimbursed for those services in order to meet the standards of care that the field itself has actually set up. So that is a long-winded answer to say there is a way to do this. It's been done many times before by other clinical specialties. Of course, psychedelics are a bit trickier, so we have to be much more intentional and mindful, but there are ways to go about that. And I just want to say how much we appreciate your concern. It is our concern as well. And we're hoping to be able to do our translation work with the psychedelic ecosystem and the incumbent systems to get the best possible outcome around patient care.
Thank you so much, Leah. And then we have an anonymous follow-up question. Have national organizations like the NASW been engaged in developing guidelines or standards?
That is a great question. That I would direct that question to the Psychedelic Medicine Association, Brain Futures, and BPMT. And there have been, as far as I understand, there have been conversations about it, but the most significant work that has been done by Brain Futures and the former organization, American Psychedelic Practitioners Association, APA. and those are available clinical guidelines.
Thank you. Then maybe a question that I have is that, of course, a lot of the questions we have here today are from people who are engaged with or are advocates who share sort of our mission, our vision. But if you're talking to skeptics, people outside of the psychedelic ecosystem, can you share a bit more about those conversations you're having with decision makers there, and maybe what preconceptions they have about psychedelics and what maybe the most common concerns you encounter? Maybe enlighten others that are here with us today about maybe, yeah, also how we respond to that, what some of the things are that you want to highlight if we're talking to people outside of our own bubble.
Yeah, great. One of the things that I think it's really important to recognize is that in the US, anyone over 40 was incredibly indoctrinated into a fear-based education around psychedelics. That is the default, whether it is operating right up front or operating below the surface. And so as you progress in the decision-making process, at some point, if that fear-based education hasn't been undone and replaced with a fact-based, science-based education, you will run into problems with decision-making. And we saw this operating and so much fear operating in that FDA decision. I will tell you, when I came into psychedelics from the commercial health insurance industry, my knowledge of psychedelics was hippies dancing around in tie-dye somewhere. Like how do we go from that to psychedelic to insurance coverage? I don't know. And that's where a lot of people are starting. Of course, we in the psychedelic ecosystem, it's very hard to understand how much of a bubble we are in. It is very important to reach people outside of the psychedelic bubble based on the motivations that they have: science, mental health treatment, finances, right? Those types of things. So that is a very important part of the work that we're doing, is developing that type of education and data that decision makers need. I'll tell you a couple of stories. So when I was working in the commercial health insurance industry, it was my job to go to the Googles of the world and explain to them the legal, moral, financial trifecta of why they were going to consider covering millions of dollars of new treatments for people. And I loved doing it because I discovered that when you bring those decision makers information, a lot of these treatments, they don't care. They don't have a child who's autistic, right? It doesn't impact them personally, but you bring them the information that they need in the way that they need it and in the time frame that they need it. You get to watch people make the right decisions over and over again. The majority of the time, they will make the best and good decisions for other people. So part of how we think about who we're addressing, there is a theory of change called motivational interviewing. This is the work of Prochaska and DiClemente. There are 5 stages of change when someone's going to change their behavior or attitudes: contemplation, planning, action, and maintenance. We are oriented very much to people who are at those first 3 stages of change. They're not even thinking about it. They don't know they need to think about it. Oh, maybe they should think about this. Oh, we should probably get a plan together about how we're going to address that. That's how when we're developing information and knowing that decision makers are going to need this information, even if they don't have investment in psychedelics, that is how we're orienting. So.
Thanks so much, Leah. I think we're at time. So to say some words of wisdom before everyone goes, and then we hope to see everyone again on the first Wednesday of the next month. And of course, you'll see a lot of people at Psychedelic Science too.
Yes, it would be great to see everyone at Psychedelic Science. And it is just wonderful to have you with us here for the first of the series. My words of wisdom are to have an intentionally beautiful, wonderful day. we are so blessed with these tools that help us to evolve and help us to deepen in to the sweetness of life and how good we can be to one another. So I hope your day will be characterized in those ways.
Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.